Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of the Autonomous Maintenance Chronicles. I mean, if you remember a week or probably a couple of weeks back, I took out the first post on the fact that we are taking out Autonomous Maintenance Chronicles, which is trying to not only share our journey of all that we are doing in how we can help organizations move to autonomous maintenance, but also kind of demystifying what it means, so on and so forth. So if you haven't really looked at the last episode, or if you haven't gone through the post, please take an opportunity to do that. There was a post on LinkedIn, a newsletter, along with a small video where we basically introduced this idea of the fact that we're going to be sort of kind of building in public, not really, but maybe building in with the community or in the network rather than building in public. And here we are in the second sort of episode of the Autonomous Maintenance Chronicles. Now, what is this in this episode we're going to do effectively? I mean, there's a bunch of things that I've drawn, but I would rather stick to the this particular diagram. Now, from my perspective, wanted to look at, I mean, from when I say my perspective, wanted to look at from my experience of how I've looked at operations and maintenance being done across facilities, so on and so forth. Wanted to look at key buckets of activities that where autonomous maintenance will I mean, if we have to drive autonomous maintenance, that will come into play. These buckets will come into play. But for a moment, let's take a step back and say, what is autonomous maintenance, or how are we defining it? Now, most of you know I'm not an engineer, so wanted to keep it very simple and broad, and at the same point in time, really forward-looking, so that we don't have to just go back and change the definition of the overall category every time a technology shift happens. So the way we are starting to think of autonomous maintenance is saying, up until the time someone needs to pick up the wrench and go to the asset to do something, how can we make sure that all the auxiliary activities that happen are largely autonomous, or let's say very less supervised. Supervision is always going to be a key, and especially where it's needed. So we are not, certainly moving into 100% autonomous nature for critical activities, but certainly over a period of time, the dependency on supervision can definitely come down. Again, we are only limiting for the purpose of how and where tech is, cultural changes, process changes, so on and so forth, and saying up until the time someone needs to pick up a wrench and go to the asset. So we're not looking at we're not, for the purpose of our mandate in the of what we're trying to do at Autonomous Chronicles, and also what Zimpla is trying to do. We're not looking at what happens after someone goes to the asset at this point in time. So that's what we are defining, how we are defining autonomous maintenance. Again, a recap and saying, up until the time someone needs to pick up a wrench and go to the asset, how can we provide very specific, clear instruction on what needs to be done, what is the problem, and what are the things that need to be done in a manner that is as much automated as possible, very less supervision, and obviously with high degree of accuracy. So that's how we are defining autonomous maintenance. Now, once we have defined autonomous maintenance, we've obviously got to look at the various sort of buckets of work that gets impacted, and obviously we'll have to rethink how the current processes are done, and in some cases throw the box away, in some cases redo the boxes. And obviously these are the main activities that you see right in the center. And then there are two auxiliary activities which happen over here, depending upon if you're further subcontracting, even if you're a service provider, and if you're further subcontracting. And then this component where you're looking at how do you report on compliances and SLAs back to your customer. So if in the truest of sense we were to look at driving autonomous maintenance, we would have to look at these buckets, and I'm the six key buckets that I've identified. Would be happy to learn from you. I mean, if there are more buckets that we should look at, broader buckets, there are obviously subcategories sitting under each. So versus the works pipeline, and saying to be in a position to be able to drive a very high autonomous maintenance with a high degree of confidence, you would need to be having a very predictable works pipeline, which would be formed via planned maintenance, reactive maintenance, correctives, and again, correctives could further come from self-reported issues or FDD, another form of maintenance strategies that you might be using, like condition-based maintenance, so on and so forth. But broadly, you would have three categories: planned, reactive, corrective, and within corrective, you would have certain sub-branches. They will all form the contribution to the works pipeline, so you would know exactly at a 2 weeks ahead, 4 weeks ahead, 6 weeks ahead. You probably can't go further than that. Then the accuracy would start to fade down, but at least 4 weeks ahead, 30 days ahead, you would be able to know what does your overall pipeline look like, and predictability of that pipeline, especially from the point of view of the active and corrective planned activities are sort of defined, so they won't change significantly unless you are strategically moving around your schedule, which perhaps doesn't happen really to a large extent. So that's number one sort of a bucket. And then once you've established that, what sort of how much activity you have, you are looking at planning to come in and saying, okay, what are my contract constraints, which means what am I rewarded for? Where am I at risk for? Am I rewarded to close all tasks very early? Am I rewarded for downtime avoidance, or I'm really very strict with SLA in my contract for planned maintenance, so that everything else outside of it probably doesn't get rewarded as much? Am I running to fail kind of a maintenance strategy, so on and so forth? So you have works pipeline, and then you have planning, which has a lot of constraints which have to be factored in. Obviously, currently you have a bunch of people who do this activity. Even if you look at the first bucket, there are multiple people who are involved. You have your reliability engineers, your energy engineers, and a bunch of people involved in this activity. You have a fair degree of support and auxiliary going in planning, and it's a very sort of a mundane, and I wouldn't say mundane, but it's definitely very cumbersome and an effort intensive exercise. And then we are looking at going into allocation. So once I had the work pipeline, I have done the planning, I'm really looking at allocating. And in allocation, again, there are a few things that need to be looked at. What sort of a backlog am I looking at? What are my resource constraints? What are my supply chain constraints? And most importantly, what are my skill constraints? There might be certain tasks which are better suited to certain kind of engineers, or skilled engineers or technicians I have on that particular site or in that portfolio. And all of this will really make sure that how do I allocate? And then ultimately, you have the effective implementation, which again, all of these put together go to the last bucket and saying, okay, does the person who's going to attend the asset has very clear instructions, context as much as needed, and clarity on what needs to be done? How does that he or she needs to report back on the task? As long as all of these elements are in place, you're in a very good position to drive autonomous maintenance. Now, obviously, and this is the core activity. Now, I've put forward contractor management because knowing that in some of the cases the allocation won't be to your in-house teams, it would go to your contractor, and even there you have a lot of coordination, which is pre-work, during works, and review of work, risk management, so on and so forth. And then once all of these activities are obviously done, you have what you're looking at, a reporting and compliance, where you have to give the customer reports, management reports, feed into Power BI, Tableau, enormous number of dashboards that look good, but no one gets to do anything with that. You're looking at driving pay mechanism driven compliances. How do you get paid for? What do you get paid for? So on and so forth. And then you have other contract compliances. So, all in all, in this episode, just wanted to lay the foundational element and say that if you're looking at so what is autonomous maintenance? I'm hoping that someone who's listening to this particular episode or reads the newsletter gets an idea of what autonomous maintenance could be. And again, at the cost of being repetitive, happy to understand and learn if there is any other definition which can help the community look at this, getting to the outcome from a more clear perspective. But if we are looking at that sort of an outcome, which is legit and is happening, and people are talking about it, then we must also look at how we are looking at driving this entire process in at this point in time. Because I think the fundamental sort of challenge that we see right now is the fact that uh, when you sprinkle, or try to sort of sub-optimize all of these individual processes and make certain tweaks, you're not going to get very far with how you use the potential advancement in technology, AI, and everything else that has to come along. There's a great opportunity to be able to rethink this entire and say, okay, here is how we are rethinking all of these work buckets from the first principles perspective, and say how each bucket kind of connects, or mini job to be done connects to each next job, and so on and so forth. So I think in this episode, just wanted to lay down some house rules on what the definition could be, and how we could look at the overall stream of buckets that happens. And then in the next episode, the second one, we're going to be talking about really saying, how do we do this very effectively? This is obviously, if someone can solve for it, you're done. You're talking about, and what does solving for this really mean? You're really talking about that if there's $100 spend right now on the total cost of ownership from the view of maintenance operations, you're really talking about that TCO coming down to $50, $60, or even lower than that. But most importantly, getting a very superior outcome, much more superior outcome than what you're currently getting, even with the best of resources deployed, in terms of energy, in terms of reliability, in terms of asset performance. And that's what we will cover in the subsequent episode. And with that, what we'll also do, for the sake of being very transparent, this is where the product perspective of Zempla also comes in. So we'll be transparent, saying which are the pieces we are building, where are we right now, how are we building, so on and so forth, and in what way can you test those many use cases for your organization before you take an enterprise level plunge and say, yes, we are ready for an end-to-end autonomous maintenance regime. Yeah, that's about it. I mean, I think probably I went a bit too fast, but would love to know from you once you take a look at this video, the episode, and looking forward to the third one. Till that point in time, take care and speak soon. Bye-bye.